Hi everyone, you're watching the Virtual Amicus and I'm Jay Lodha. Where on the Virtual Amicus, we believe in taking assistance from experts, from speakers who have carved a niche in a particular area of law and which they discuss on our channel. And today's topic for discussion is indeed very interesting, not only because it has not been covered so far, but because it is on forensic investigation. And broadly speaking, it is the gathering and analysis of all crime-related physical evidence in order to come to a conclusion about a subject. Now, joining us today on the Virtual Amicus is someone who's a specialist in that field, although he's a chartered accountant, but he has extensive working experience in the areas of accounting and forensics, worked on various proactive and reactive assignments across sectors and jurisdictions, and also with various regulatory authorities. And he's also served as a former senior director and an associate with top companies in the country. Today, we are joined by Mr. Siddharth Keskar, sir, who's also a chief at MZM Analytics, and just to give you all a brief introduction, he's also a chartered accountant and company secretary, and did his graduation from Narsi Munji College. Thank you so much, sir, for taking out time and doing this session for us. This has not been covered so far, so I can't wait to begin with the Q&A segment. Anything that you wish to say before we start with our Q&A segment?
Thanks, Jay. I think the Virtual Amicus is doing a great job. I think they're covering various interesting topics from a legal standpoint. Just a disclaimer, I'm not a lawyer by profession. I'm a chartered accountant, and I think I certainly work a lot with Indian international law firms and helping them gather facts and evidences which can be produced in the court of law at the various levels. So I think, Jay, thanks a lot for having me here, and hope the session becomes interactive and interesting.
Very well, sir. Let's quickly start with our Q&A segment. So if you could first give us a little background about yourself. Over to you.
So I think, Jay, you covered that in the introduction. Just to quickly, I'm a chartered accountant profession, been in this field for more than 8 to 9 years now in the forensic field. The forensic field has been emerging over the years. I think the sophistication of fraud, what we have seen, has evolved. And I think it's interesting day by day. Just from a career standpoint, do what you love and love what you do. I think I'm pretty much every case what I'm working on in the last 8 to 9 years has been unique and different in its own perspective. Hence, every Monday, every Monday morning is quite exciting to come to work and work on such matters and assist clients and law firms and equity funds in solving their issues.
Very well, sir. And now going ahead with our next question, what exactly do we mean by the term forensics and investigation? If there is a correlation between the two, if you could explain the terms in a nutshell for all our viewers.
Sure. So I think the forensic and investigation ambit or the gamut what we do is pretty wide. I think just to give a quick overview of what kind of professionals work in the forensic and investigation space, or the corporate investigation and forensic space are a mix of forensic technical experts, technology experts, chartered accountants, valuers, management graduates, and so lawyers, and so on and so forth. I think so a chartered accountant is essential in a fraud case because it is means to an end. So if that's the whole gamut of fraud and investigation. If you look at, we work on from a daily life, we work on various cases of whistleblower complaints. We work on cases of financial mismanagement and financial window dressing. We work as a background and integrated due diligence on the promoters. So before a private equity investor. So just to give you an example here, a private equity investor looking for a target company in India, right? So over and above a financial due diligence and a legal due diligence, what is I think highly recommended, which a lot of private equity players are taking a deep cognizance, is the integrity and background check on the promoters. Because you're putting in money, you're putting in a ambit of trust on the local parties. So I think a detailed reputational check in terms of because I think the Indian corporate registry here is quite data rich. It's very important to look at the various companies the promoters are associated with. Is there been any litigation against them? Is there any adverse media coverage against them? Do some business intelligence on them in terms of speaking to competitors, speaking to various research reports. What is their credit ratings given by the various agencies? So I think third would be from a review of assets, right? So for example, you're doing there's a litigation award awarded by a particular court or arbitration proceedings. So locating the assets by reviewing the financial statements, going on ground and seeing where the assets lie of the particular person who needs to pay the money is also covered in our ambit of forensic investigation. Also, what we do in forensic investigation broadly is also about proactive, like a lot of companies nowadays are investing in proactive services. People want to know early warning signals. What's going before it goes bad? What could prevent it to go bad? So that's kind of the broad ambit of forensic and investigation services. So it involves a reactive side and a proactive side. The trend is quite changing. It was more 90-95% reactive side, but in the last 2 to 3, 4 years, we can see a lot of corporates investing in trainings about code of conduct, compliances, about their gift. They are also amending on their gifting policies, awareness. A lot of companies are making those, have bots on the intranet to ask them to clear their ethical dilemmas. So I think we help in providing those trainings to various corporates and organizations as such. So the ambit is pretty broad and pretty huge.
Fantastic, sir. Now, going ahead with our next question, sir, broadly, if you could throw some light on legal statutes that govern this very field, like what white collar frauds in India.
Sure, Jay. So I think as a first, the disclaimer in the beginning of the session, I'm not a lawyer, but I think for a forensic investigator, it is pretty important to know the broad statutes that govern the work, what we do. For example, in the last 5 to 7 years, if you see the kind of broad amendments that have been brought in the Indian statutes on covering corporate and white collar law. If you look at the white collar lawyers in the country, as such, have increased 3 or 4-fold. For example, if you want to do and say the new IBC law, right? The Indian Insolvency Code 2016. There has been a transaction audit mandated on the corporate debtor. There has been a 29A where you need to disclose the related parties and the interested parties of the resolution applicants. So looking, such as like for example, IBC is one of the cases. SEBI has come out with a lot of amendments in terms of insider trading, about unethical practices. For example, SEBI had a large raid on various social media channels recently in India, which were advocating or subscribing to shares based on some payment made to them. There was a raid conducted by SEBI. If you look at the SFIO being established, if you're looking at the ED and EOW is the economic offense wing, which has raised the bar, which had 50 lakhs, now it has gone to as high as 10 crores. There is a enforcement directorate, which looks at the Prevention of Money Laundering Act and looking at the foreign exchange, the FEMA violations. So if you look at the ambit of legal statutes, it's coming up is the data privacy laws under discussion. There is also laws pertaining to the CSR activities which have come up in the recent past. So there has been a lot of aggressive amendments that govern the laws and regulations around forensic investigation and the white collar crime as a whole. Also, if you look at the management, the responsibility on the management given, there has been a disclosure requirement where the management has to state that the controls are in place to detect and prevent frauds. There has been also regulations and obligations on the auditor to report in the new Caro order 2000, which has come up, right? Wherein they have to disclose the kind of whistleblower complaints they have received. What is the mitigation measures taken by the company to mitigate a particular whistleblower complaint? So the disclosure levels has become very heavy. Last but not the least, India is going to be the first country to have an accounting standard on forensic investigation, forensic audits, which is going to go live very soon.
That's amazing, sir. Now, going ahead with our next question, sir, is forensic accounting audit or a fraud risk assessment the need of the hour for companies and industries, just like internal audits or statutory audits that are conducted on an annual basis? Now, conducting these proactive assessments, is it a good practice understanding the current scenario with the increase, phenomenal and exponential increase in crimes in our country?
Sure. So I think I would like to break down the question to various some statistics what I have ready. So India has been the ranking of India in the transparency index has going lower by lower. It was 84 last year, right? Out of the 180 companies being shortlisted for review. the ease of doing business or the investing in India is also perceived a kind of a high risk unless you mitigate all the fraud risk around it, right? So for example, a statutory auditor, the basic difference, which is taught in a curriculum and a forensic audit, is the auditor is only a watchdog, but not a bloodhound. A forensic investigator has to be a bloodhound, right? So internal audit, again, coming back to second level of internal audit, what rightly mentioned. Internal audit is about to check the processes, design and implement designs of the processes, how they are processing, testing them, and looking at the various mitigation measures that need to be met to improve the process of the company. Is there been revenue leakage? So I think internal audit has also been a very strong point where the red flags have been detected, which can lead to a deep dive analysis of conducting a detailed investigation. For example, in an internal audit, you see a large trend of, for example, so I think that just to get down to a basic of fraud. So how does the fraud evolve? There's a concept, a theory called fraud triangle. So fraud triangle means opportunity, incentive, and rationalization, right? That's the basic definition of a fraud triangle. So from a fraud triangle perspective, let's take an example of a sales head, right? A sales head has to report its numbers for a listed company quarterly. During an internal audit, you see a trend of sales, large amount of sales being parked on the last 5 days of the last month of the quarter, right? And there has been certain sales reversals. So I think a person in power, a sales head of a listed company, has the obligation of reporting those numbers to the stakeholders, has his incentive bonuses linked to the sales numbers he delivers. So in that sense, we need to, in data analytics, you can see what are the last 5, if for example, 20% of the whole quarter sales has been done on the last day of a particular month. You can see a large focus given to 5 customers. We actually, in a specific case, you actually do in a forensic, you will see a background check of these 5 people. In some cases, in one of the cases I did in a similar way, I could see these 5 companies were nothing but dummy companies formed by the name of the wife of the sales manager. So they're very vanilla and hypothetical examples what I'm giving you, but that's kind of explains the whole trend of internal audit and forensic relation. So internal audit or forensic, if you do a deep dive data analytics on the data sizes, you can see a lot of trend lines which can be deep driven in the forensic audit. So the next sub question what you asked was, what is the forensic the need of the hour? So something called first is awareness. So I think it is highly recommended, and a lot of companies are taking cognizance of the fact that as part of the L&D, learning and development training, a lot of training has been given of code of conduct of the company. What is the gifting policy of the company? Second, it is something called as fraud risk assessment. So in a manufacturing company, in a particular, say, cement company, what are the processes and what are the potential fraud risk? This is our experience. We plot down and we test specific samples to come out whether they're fraudulent or not, or what is the risk of fraud based on the automated or manual controls that are in place. So forensic risk assessment also is recommended for companies. If, for example, oil and gas companies coming with a large rig, and there's a lot of capex intensive project. Looking at the capital intensive project, you need to see whether the deployment of the funds have been done properly or not. So I will call it an assessment. So also an health checkup, like for example, in a private equity fund, there were an array of dozens of companies invest in India. The private equity fund is sitting in the US, headquartered in the US. It is also required from a surprise audit perspective or a concurrent fraud assessment perspective to look at the target companies and what's happening with them. Whether there has been any, for example, a sale area, a statutory auditor, internal auditor, and a forensic auditor will look at a particular issue differently. That's where the difference lies. So it's not a mandate by the statute, but it is recommended to have those preventive controls or early warning signals controls in place to have an incident like this, because the revenue leakage. So it is as per a CFE, the Association of Certified Forensic Examiners, the survey says a company approximately loses 5 to 6% of its revenue yearly to fraud. That's kind of the spectrum of, and the reputation laws also follows. So I think a forensic review on a proactive side is definitely recommended.
Very well, sir. There you go. Valuable insights coming in from our Amicus for today's session. Now, sir, now that we mentioned about the exponential rise that we've seen and witnessed in frauds and crimes, what kind of frauds and crimes are we referring to here that have increased substantially and exponentially in the past 2 years?
So the last 2 years has been a different era. What I've seen is living mankind. I think the COVID era of 2 years. So as I said in the earlier part of the conversation, the sophistication and the sophistication of frauds have changed. You will not see on a particular email saying, please, from a employer I know, vendor, please pay me 2 lakh rupees. I'll give you this contract. Gone are those days. People have become smarter. The fraud actors have become smarter. The sophistication level has increased. So if you ask me what I've been seeing in the last 2 years of trends of frauds, first would be data theft. I think when a downfall, a recession comes in the country or in the universe, there is always the fraud triangle comes in play. There is, for example, a lot of people want to earn money by stealing proprietary information to the company. And as you all know, we all were working from home. Still, a lot of people like us are still hybrid mode, right? So I think the controls, to get the controls from a hybrid work culture or an offline work culture, the company had to take time to manage to the expectations of those controls. In that, a lot of people took advantage of such a scenario, diverted a lot of company information to their personal ID, to their competitors for some opportunity of money making businesses. Second, if you look at the last 2 to 3 years, the crypto era, right? The new buzzword that everyone's talking about. If you look at a lot of data hacks, data hacks by fraud actors sitting somewhere in, say, X country is hacking data of Indian on international companies and asking money via bitcoins. So it all sounds like a Hollywood movie, but that's really happening. There are 5 to 7 examples what we saw, which headlined the press during the last 2 to 3 years of such scenarios. Third would be a lot of CSR frauds noted during the lockdown. A lot of corporates came ahead, and part of the CSR funding, which is allowed by the law, they went ahead and actually kept funds or invested funds in giving back to society, right? But a lot of the people in control of these funds diverted the money to their personal benefits. A lot of the benefits were not passed by the people authority of the CSR funds to the people of need. So these are the 2 examples what I saw. Also from a procurement fraud, the typical frauds that were going on always continued because, as I said, the controls were weak considering the offline mode of work culture.
Very well, sir. And now, sir, how do you go about finding and spotting that fraud in any matter that you conduct an investigation? And what are these steps that you take, when you talk about conducting an investigation? What are the steps involved in this process?
So I will thank you. Maybe let's have a scenario build, a very simple scenario build for this. So assuming there is a tender opened by a company, there are 3 parties bidding for the tender, and the purchase manager wants to make a buck out of it, right? The purchase head, who's the final approver, right? We could see a scenario where 3 bids have come in. One bid being the bid has been given to the lowest party, right? But when you look closely, the bid that has come of the vendor has come after the cutoff hours, right? The other 2 parties, though were lower, right, were nothing but the parties belonging or related to the purchase manager himself, right? In such a case, this is the case. So we know there has been certain favoritism given by the purchase head to a specific vendor. So how do we go about? I think the planning and internal employee investigation is very, very important, right? So I think what we need to achieve. So the 5 W's, as we call it, what we need to achieve, when did it happen, where did it happen, with whom did it happen, and what was the rationale behind it, and what was the quantum of benefit behind it. So these are the various W's which we need to answer. So a well-defined plan has to be put in place. So investigation involves, from an internal company point of view, a combined effort or a logical effort of various teams of the company. Firstly, being the legal head, because I think the legal head needs to be part of it. The compliance or the internal audit head, he needs to be part of the investigation. The HR person, the HR head has to be kept in the loop, and the management, because I think forensic investigator typically should be mandated by the compliance head, who directly reports to the internal audit committee or the board to maintain independence, right? So in such a case, what we do is, so first step would be looking at the electronic records of the company, of the employee. So we actually, the company can do the investigation internally or externally. There are various legally acceptable compliant tools, IT tools, which will make an image of the computer, review the electronic stored information on the computer given by the company, right? There has to be a proper chain of custody maintained, which can be legally admitted as per the Evidence Act going forward. In a case if the company decides to go from a legal filing perspective, the document has to be reviewed smartly by reviewing, putting keywords which are relevant to the case. Secondly, you also look at the background, do a background check on these 3 vendors. What are these vendors? What are the onboarding forms of these vendors? Is there been a, like, do you find any connection with the purchase head as such? Has there been any conflict with other employees, right? Third would be looking at some ledgers of these, scrutinizing the ledgers of these vendors. What are the kind of payments what have gone in? What is the nature of work that has been assigned to these vendors? For example, a vendor supplying catering services should not definitely supply paints to the company. So I think that's kind of the basic spotting what is required. And fourth would be actually conducting a fact-gathering interview of the employee in assisting the management of the company by taking a fact-finding interview. The interview should not be confrontational. It has to be more of fact-gathering. It has to be because it has to be consent, and it has to be agreed at the end of it. And after that, a detailed report of the work performed and the findings observed during the corporate investigation has to be put together in a report, and the report should be submitted. That's typically a corporate investigation, if you ask me. There are various ways. In this case, so a lot of cases we work with lawyers, right? Or we work to an expert report that needs to be submitted to the court of law or under an arbitration ongoing proceedings, right? So I think first of all, by taking an assignment, what we need to do is we need to be independent. We need to have no bias or prejudice towards a party who's managing an investigation. It has to be, if you look at our reports, a forensic report, it will be straight fact-finding review, right? So it's basically depending on facts. We don't pass opinions here. So the report has to be like reviewed by the lawyers whom we are assisting with. And I think that's where, from an admissibility of court point of view, we admit and also depose when required in cases asked by the enforcement agencies or asked by the for example, the arbitration proceedings.
But I'm sure where fraud and investigation, everything is involved, I think assistance of lawyers is always mandatory there. So going ahead with our next question, sir. Now in this process of, spotting that fraud and finding that and conducting investigation, do you ever face roadblocks? And if in case you do, how do you overcome them?
So I think from a positive connotation, to answer this question, if you ask me, for being a fraud investigator, I think what's the prima facie recommended thing is to have an eye for detail, have an analytical mind, or have a professional skepticism. In forensic, one of my earlier managers told me, believe that everything is fraud. Don't believe everything on the face value. So I think from that perspective, we look at it from an objective manner and a very detailed manner, I think. From a roadblock perspective, for example, in a forensic audit, right? A forensic audit mandate for an NPA investigation, right? The funds being diverted over the period of for various layers of company. So if you are mandated by a particular agency or by a bank, right, to get the data of various other banks and international banks can be challenged. If you look at your own bank statement, then the name of the party whom the money has been paid is not always disclosed. You'll see a UTI number. You don't know, like you need to do actually, if you want to do a fund trailing, where the fund actually landed up, where the funds landed outside the ecosystem of the company, be it a subsidiary JV, and went to a third party outside the universe of the company, group companies. That becomes a challenge sometimes. Sometimes challenge becomes not finding anything on the emails, but looking at a lifestyle of a company, a lifestyle of an individual. But people, there are multiple complaints against a person, and the documents also say that it's been there has been a visible fraud being committed. Like for example, a fake letterhead being submitted for expense voucher, T&E vouchers by the employee, but nothing found on the electronic information of the company. But that time, having an interview or a strategically fact gathering interview could reveal a lot of details about the modus operandi used by the client. Also, there are a lot of laws governing. For example, people are not smart enough to use company given laptops for everything. There is a WhatsApp. You cannot, as per data privacy or the company policy, you cannot review the mobile belonging to the personal or the employee, right? There has to, unless there's a consent given by the employee. So in this case, it becomes difficult because a lot of cases happen on WhatsApp. In case of data theft, if you look at nowadays, WhatsApp web has become so easy. It is very difficult if you want to transfer a file to an individual using WhatsApp web from your computer. There is hardly any logs that are maintained. There has been, for example, in cases where we have seen when you want to review a particular data, a lot of data has been deleted by the employee, right? By using a sophisticated anti-forensic tool. So recovering that data using forensic processing devices or softwares becomes difficult, next to impossible. So the fraud actors have become much more smarter than the investigators in certain cases. There have been a lot of apparent inherent challenges, but this is how we deal with and put a limitation in our report.
Very well, sir. And sir, lastly, now that you've built a successful career in this field, would you recommend this field to young professionals? And by professionals, can both lawyers and chartered accountants be a part of it? Since you're a chartered accountant yourself, can lawyers take up this as a field of expertise? And if yes, what would be your piece of advice or piece of wisdom for all of them who wish to build a successful career like you have? And also, to add to that, any particular course, certification that you wish to recommend them, because I'm sure for a fact that this is not taught as an elective subject or as a compulsory subject in most of the law schools. This is one field where every law student is not exposed to in his law school years.
Sure. So Jay, I think there are multiple courses now in the field. I think so the international US-based board called CFE, Certified Fraud Examiner, it's an exam which you can give. It's highly recommended. It's a spectrum of covers everything from a law governing the fraud world. What are the forensic scenarios? What are the technical words? What is called in the fraud schemes, right? So it is the most recommended course. The Indian Institute of Chartered Accountants also has various diploma courses and certified courses in forensic accounting. There are also various international universities giving courses on forensic accounting. I think it's a lot of material available in a global university, and also these e-learning courses. There are plenty of material to get hold of to build a career in forensic. Also, I think lawyers definitely, because lawyers understand the law, the white collar law as we call it, right? So I think they become an important aspect of a team to have done forensic investigation, from looking at emails or looking at non-compliances of specific laws. Definitely lawyers can take it up. Just some brushing on the accounting skills will be helpful for them, and I think they will be as good forensic investigators as chartered accountants can be.
I'm sure there are many boutique firms that have now opened who are specializing in this very field. Because back in the day when we were in law school, I don't think we even heard about any law firm or chamber specializing in this. I think it was more of a niche area, and then it I think exponentially rose. With the advent of increase in financial crimes and frauds.
Yeah.
I think there was this necessity that was felt to have a specialized area of practice dedicated to financial frauds, white collar crimes, and then somewhere in between to adorn the hat of a digital detective to have those thinking gaps. And I think that is how this field germinated. So correct me if I'm wrong there.
No, 100% Jay. So I think from a forensic investigator and working with white collar law firm departments of large law firms in the country and internationally, there are multiple synergies. I think because fraud has become a very serious issue, and all the companies in the world or world and including India have started taking help or advice at the early stage when a whistleblower complaint is received to the end stage from a prosecution or a defense standpoint of a white collar lawyer. So our reports, majority of the reports go examination from an expert white collar or a experienced white collar lawyer who actually uses the contents or uses the report as his to draft his complaint to file before the enforcement agencies or the court of law.
Wow, that was indeed a fantastic session, something totally new, something that we've never discussed before in the Virtual Amicus. Well, I've been recording sessions for over a year now, and it's so nice and wonderful to have fresh perspectives to be brought on the table. So thank you so much, sir. Anything that you wish to say towards the end before we wrap up this segment?
Thank you, Jay. I think it was a great pleasure having the session with you. And all the best to you, and all the best for the Virtual Amicus.
Very well. To all the viewers who are watching, our email is mentioned on the channel in case if you have any queries, any doubts on this area in the field of law. Feel free to write to us in case if you still have any conceptual doubts or fundamental queries. Feel free to write to us. Our email is mentioned on the channel. We'll be more than happy to forward the same to our amicus for today's session. And we're always there to help you out and guide you through. Thank you so much, Siddharth Keskar, sir, for taking out time doing the session. I know it's a busy working day. Taking out time, from your busy schedule and doing a session on the Virtual Amicus really means a lot to me and my team. It's goodbye for now. Thank you, sir.
Our pleasure, sir. Thank you.